my whole life, I had been told or I had been conditioned to believe that using that term, black, was not okay. And I remember as a child even experiencing and being hushed if you asked why someone's skin color was different, as children just so naturally do out of curiosity. I remember my experience from a child being hushed. And what was then occurring, what was then happening was in my own household. I was doing it to my husband, I was doing it to my children.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize the conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
The doors to my 10-week signature program, Represented, are now open and enrollments are taking place. Represented program is specifically designed for heart-led online business owners like you, committed to creating safer, inclusive spaces for everyone, especially those who've historically been left out. Through Represented, you'll understand how biases, including those in AI tools, impact your business and how to actively address them. You'll move beyond performative actions, embedding genuine, conscious inclusivity into your everyday practices. And you'll gain practical strategies to confidently navigate conversations around race and equity, making meaningful and lasting change. If you've been experiencing the pull to do business more intentionally in a way that feels good on the inside and allows you to live out your values, you are in the right place, my friend. I'll help you build an AI bias-aware business that reflects a more humane world, one that lifts those most underrepresented so we all rise together. Because a just society is only as strong as those with the least privilege. Head over to anikishuru.com/represented for all the details. The live round commences on 10th April, and scholarships are available to those who may need them. That link again is anikishuru.com/represented, and I have that in the show notes. You know, I only bring you the very best on this podcast, and this week is no different. I am speaking with a past client and a student who we worked together for an extended period of time. Sarah Townsend is a beautiful woman inside and out. What I loved about our conversation, because we are really talking about her journey into racial equity work, the before, during doing the work together, working together, and after, is how personal she gets. You know, she gets to talk about the things that she was learning inside of my program Represented, and the impact it was having on her, her family, her husband, her kids. And it's just a really true illustration of what it looks like when you begin to do this work and how that then progresses, and what it does for you and the people around you and even your business. So here's a little bit about Sarah. She is a certified life coach, leadership coach, facilitator, and program designer. thriving on getting to blend her expertise to empower and inspire transformation in every corner of your life. For women in their 30s and 40s, Sarah offers life coaching experiences to help you step into your main character era. I love that. Embracing your authentic self, reclaiming your power, and creating a life that truly lights you up. In the workplace, Sarah brings her HR experience, leadership expertise, and life coaching training together to deliver holistic coaching experiences for individuals and teams. As a facilitator and program designer, Sarah specializes in crafting immersive, engaging experiences that inspire growth and connection. When Sarah isn't wearing those hats, she is soaking up life as a mom to two energetic kids and a pup who might as well be called her third child. Life for Sarah is a blend of salty breezes, yum, sandy toads, and meaningful connections, and she wouldn't have it any other way. Without further ado, here is Sarah Townsend. Welcome back to another episode of Represented Podcast. Sarah Townsend, thank you so much for being here, beautiful woman. I am so looking forward to this conversation.
No, thank you, Annie. I am so, so excited to be here, and thank you for the invitation to share my experience.
I want us to just get right into it, Sarah. And I want you to just share, where were you on your journey of racial awareness before we started working together? And the reason why I ask this is because a vast majority of my ideal clients, my people, is they're the good ones. They're the ones who are doing all the good things, Annie. I volunteer. I have friends who are people of color, or maybe even though I don't have, I know I want to be. I strive to do better. I'm conscious. I try to be as inclusive as I can. And I'm just one of those people who can't stand racism. I want to do better. I'm on the good side, so to speak. And that's why I asked that question, because a lot of these folks feel that they don't need to be preached to, or they don't need to hear about racism because they know it, they can identify it. And so, if you could just share, where were you before you began this journey?
Mm, Such a great question. And as you were just talking, Annie, the word that popped straight into my mind was I was at a place of inaction. I was one of those people, and I feel like so many people will be able to relate to this, that I would have described myself in the way that you just did, that I was a good person, that I wasn't someone that was contributing to racism in the world, that I didn't use racist comments or treat people differently because of the color of their skin. But I was also very silent. And it wasn't until a few years ago when I actually started to have more interactions with, Black, Indigenous people of color, and I started to hear firsthand their stories and their lived experience that weren't necessarily anything new in the sense of things that you would hear, but it felt so personal because I was hearing it firsthand
Mhm.
from specifically these women, that it made me start to open my eyes to this. And it made me realize that whilst I consider myself one of the good ones, I also wasn't doing anything to contribute to the change. And I was just in this place of inaction. And I sat there with a new level of awareness, probably for the last couple of years. And it wasn't until I started my coaching journey with the Beautiful You Coaching Academy, and where you delivered a session on diversity, equity, inclusion, that the thought in the fire was lit there,
Mhm.
and a new level of understanding. And following the course finishing and then becoming aware of represented, I was like, oh, okay, hold on a second. Here's an opportunity to actually move from this place of inaction to start to take action. And that very first point and starting point for me was about learning and unlearning and developing a new sense of awareness before I started doing anything differently.
Wow. And so your coaching journey, training to become a coach, kind of opened up things even more and led you to this path of represented. When you came into the program, did you come into it thinking that it will just confirm the things you already know? Or did you come into it going like, I have so much to learn? Where were you like kind of mentally on that journey?
Yeah. I came into represented so open. I came in knowing I had a lot to learn, and I also came in knowing I had a lot to unlearn. I I knew that there would be some societal conditioning there. I knew that there would be some conditioning from my upbringing, but I did not realize how much or how deeply or in what ways all of the conditioning and my lived experiences and what I had been taught, how much that was ingrained or in what ways it was as well. And so for me, coming into represented, I knew that it was going to be uncomfortable. I knew that it was going to be challenging. And I knew that I was going to have to really push myself to grow and evolve in this space. So I definitely came in with a level of discomfort already. However, the beauty that the coaching academy and the introduction to yourself and the work that it gave me, it introduced me to tell me that there was a space that I could go and have the courage and be brave and be vulnerable and open to learning, and in a space that I wasn't aware of before that. And so that's what represented gave me and gifted me was I could come in where I was at, and that was okay. Where I was at was okay because my intentions were to unlearn, to learn, to grow.
Mm. So powerful. And I vividly remember your engagement in the program. It was cohort number 10, the cohort that just completed last year. And you brought so much into our sessions. You made me look forward to our group coaching calls because you came ready. You had taken the time to not only go through the content, but really have questions that went just beyond surface level. Do you remember when you asked me that question? And this was, I think it was on the welcome call, actually, Sarah, when you said, is there anything wrong with referring to Black women as Black? Is it okay to use the term Black? And do you remember how I responded? I responded by asking you a question back before unpacking that. What makes you, what made you think it was wrong in the first place? And that's kind of where I want us to sit with this, Sarah. The idea that using the term Black is wrong. Um, Tell me, where did that thinking come from?
Yeah. Oh, I remember that moment. I remember that moment very well, Annie. I actually like get a full body response just thinking back to how nervous I was to actually ask that question. And where that question actually came from was the week prior, my husband and I were actually having a conversation at home, and it came from that because he had used the word black to describe something that we'd seen on the news when speaking to what we had witnessed, and I went, oh. like I don't know if you should be using that word to describe what we had witnessed and seen, which was Black people on the news and something that had happened. And I remember saying to him, because I felt that discomfort, and because he hadn't used it in a way that was at all in reference to someone being less than or anything like that. And I said to him, well, do you know what? Represented starts next week. And maybe that's my starting point. Maybe that's my question first and foremost for Annie. And it was on the welcome call. We hadn't even begun the work yet, but I felt like it was such a pivotal moment for me to be able to really crack myself open and move past that discomfort of being like, do you know what? I have signed up to be in this represented space to ask the uncomfortable questions, to ask questions where I know that from you, Annie, you would see them for what they were. And that I was doing this to be brave and to be courageous and to start my journey. And it had to start there for me because my whole life I had been told or I had been conditioned to believe that using that term, Black, was not okay. And I remember as a child even experiencing and being hushed if you asked why someone's skin color was different, as children just so naturally do out of curiosity. I remember my experience from a child being hushed. And what was then occurring, what was then happening was in my own household. I was doing it to my husband, I was doing it to my children. And so for you to then be able to ask me that question back without giving me an answer, but to help me grow in that way and asking, why do I think it's not okay? It was because I had only ever heard that term be used in a way that was to describe either a Black person, an Indigenous person, or a person of color in a way that made them come across as less than. And to then have this conversation, and I remember it so vividly, around what we then give weight to when it comes to language and being able to change that. And it was a really important moment in my journey with racism to know that if I continue to keep shying away from things that make me uncomfortable or other people uncomfortable, that's not going to create that change. And that was where it really started for me, in that moment of having that courage to ask and recognizing that I can use that term. It's the way in which I use it. It's the way in which I understand it and what it means to me and to others. But I also have a chance to change my children's experience growing up, and that not to sweep these things off or to hush my children, but to have big, wholehearted, courageous conversations. And so that's what, me being able to ask that was the gift that I got back, that it changed my association with this word. And it's also allowing me to educate my children differently as well.
Oh, yeah, that question in itself, Sarah, and thank you for the background behind that, the context of asking the question. It was like an icebreaker. It just broke so many things and allows not just yourself, but the others who are part of the program to go deeper, whereby you're not just reading about the atrocities or reading or hearing them. It goes from a place of just from your head to your heart. And you begin to understand your relationship with racism, because a lot of times, going back to, what we opened with, that I'm a good person, you'd never associate any way, any relationship with racism with yourself as an individual. You're like, oh no, that's for certain people who behave a certain way, who do certain things, that's them. And I love that this was the beginning of just allowing yourself to go back and see, where did this come from? What's the connotation that has been attached to the term Black? Where does this come from? And even though it's okay to use it, it still feels wrong, because this is you are undoing a learning from childhood when you were hushed. And I believe that when we're growing up, a lot of our caregivers were coming from a place of trying to do the best with what they had. It wasn't necessarily that they were doing that because they were trying to be prejudiced. They were doing it because they were like, oh, we don't want to do the wrong thing. You know, like the way that's taboo. Oh, we can't say that we see color. We don't see color. We're all the same. And it's stemming from a place of fear. So when you don't understand something, when you don't understand somebody who is different from you, whether it's indigenous people and the history that we've been told about them, then there's a fear associated. And so we don't want to talk about them. We're like, shh, 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 no, 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 don't mention that. And then the child grows up, becomes an adult, carries those beliefs into their family. And it's just this thing that just keeps going on from generation to generation. And Sarah, one of the things that I witnessed during your journey was that awakening, the awakening whereby you moved from looking at your understanding of racism really changed,
Mm.
whereby, you thought that it's an individual thing, it's people who say certain things, it's people who do certain things. It completely shifted to you seeing it as a system. And I think for me as an educator, it was also a pleasant surprise because for me as a Black person who is on the other end of experiencing racism differently, is that to me, I can see it for what it is. But to hear you say it back to me like, oh my goodness, Annie, it's a system. It's not an individual. It's not a group of people. It's not people who do this. It's embedded in our systems. We're part of it. I
Mm.
just want you to just let's talk about that realization process.
Yeah, yeah, that was a massive moment for me. To move from a place of thinking I understood what racism was. And as you just described there, I truly, my understanding of it before doing this work was where it was either, as you've just mentioned, it was either two individuals or two groups that could be racist towards one another. And gosh, was that just blown up in a really good way with what I started to learn with the work that we were doing through the modules. And that was to actually understand, no, racism isn't just something that has always existed. Like we as humans created that system, this system that is a power over system, that is a system that has been created and built to benefit people based on the color of their skin. That to learn that someone, a person, an individual, had actually spent time to sit there and classify people and their worth based on the degree of how dark their skin was to how light. It was mind-blowing. And it was one of those moments. And as you said, it really was an awakening for me to actually realize that this wasn't all that long ago. This wasn't all that long ago that someone decided to start spruiking this message that the darker your skin was,
Mhm.
the less you were worth in this world. And from understanding that to then understanding how these systems in the world are built, to understanding the impact even in countries where Black people, it is their country, and yet how whiteness has creeped in and evolved and also spread in that way was just it was an awakening to understand that the world has been built and done so through creation of us as humans to benefit white people over and over and over again. And part of this awakening made me realize that it's not just people's perceptions or understandings that need to change. it's the system, it's the structure. Like this is so much bigger than just a person like myself that thought that they were doing good to then changing and being on the journey. It is not going to be enough, that there's also these systems that need to be brought down and changed as well for us to truly live in a world where there is racial equity.
Mm. Mm. And you know, this is where we, as online business owners, as coaches, we're able to take our power back as we build our businesses to decide how are we going to do that inclusively. And you have just recently been awarded Trainee of the Year with the Beautiful You Coaching Academy. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Um, I guess, how do you view your role as a coach, and in particular, potential coach for those who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, knowing what you know now about race? Because it's different, you know, as somebody who has, think about it, not done this work, coming in and holding space, as opposed to now somebody who has done the work, you're coming in different.
Yeah. Yeah. Really different. I don't know if you remember, Annie, there was a space in time in Represented when I remember saying to you around, because in being really transparent with your audience here as well, like I so far have only coached white people. And I remember saying in Represented something along the lines of needing to do some more work so that I was ready to coach a person of color. And I remember you saying to me that sometimes that readiness is the openness to do it and to get it wrong.
Mm.
Because if I am just waiting to be ready, I might be waiting my entire life. And being a coach and being a business owner, and what I've learned through Represented is that it is better to have the courage to do it and to get it wrong and to admit that you've got it wrong and to learn from it and to grow than to not do anything at all. Because that's where I was before I began this journey, was inaction and in a place of fear of not wanting to get it wrong. And I'm now in a place where I'm like, I am open and I'm ready, and I can hold space for people of color. And I could make a mistake or I could do something wrong, but my commitment to this work now is that I will try, and I will always try with the best that I know in that moment, and always with a whole heart and coming from a place of integrity rather than just not doing anything anymore. Like that has been my commitment to doing the work in this space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And for me, what that's also looking like is not doing things to tick the box. It's not doing things so it looks like I'm doing the right thing. It's always, for me now, it's this new level of awareness with intentions behind action. And a really good example of that was following Represented, my inclusion statement on my website that actually took me close to 2 months after finishing Represented to finalize. Yeah. I had thought I'm gonna finish and I'm gonna do it and it's going to be done. But again, pushing that and forcing that was feeling like it's something I have to do versus coming from a place of what do I want this to say about me? As a white woman with all of the privilege that I have in this world, I want my inclusion statement to be a direct extension of my intentions in this space, because I haven't just gone and done Represented to finish it, to have a badge to then put on my website to say, oh, I've done the work and my journey's finished here. And that inclusion statement, it took 2 months for it to evolve into what it has evolved into. But I read it now and it feels aligned and it feels vulnerable and it feels real. And what my hope is that should a person of color come across me and my website, that whilst right now they might not be able to see themselves in terms of representation in my past clients, that they can read my inclusion statement and they can feel me and they can know what my intentions are and who I am and what my vision is for myself in this space, and that I'm going to be on this journey lifelong. It's going to be a lifelong journey and it's going to continue to unravel, but I'm committed and I'm committed to the work. And that's what I hope that a person of color who comes across me can see and feel, that they can see my heart in this space and that they can also read that and it not feel like a generic statement of someone that's just trying to look good in the world when it comes to creating racial equity.
Oh, Sarah, so much to unpack with that response that you've given. And that inclusion statement that you created, it was more than 2 months because, represented itself is almost 3 months. And then 2 months later is when you're working on this. And this is something that you had started thinking about way, way before when you were introduced to this work, when you were still training to become a coach. So all those thought processes when you were thinking it would be good to have an inclusion statement, all that entire time took months and months and months to get to where you finally did pen it down. And as you know, an inclusion statement continues to evolve because where you are today is not where you were, when you wrote it. It will continue to evolve as you learn and you get exposed to different things. Uh, but I think what's really important to note here is that when we're looking for people to support us, when we're looking for somebody to hold space for us, and we're looking for that coach, yes, sometimes we may not, in fact, oftentimes we may not see ourselves represented through imagery or testimonials, but it's the heart of the person. There's something that you can read about somebody and you're just drawn to them. There's the language that they're using. There are certain keywords that they're using that I'm self-identifying. I'm like, yeah, that's my person. Yeah, they spoke about this. And I feel like I could take a step closer to them. And then when they do then come across the inclusion statement, it solidifies perhaps what they were thinking. So an inclusion statement plays a really integral part of, the trust and seeing might this be the next person that I choose to be the coach for me. And so I know a lot of times imagery may not be there, but it's the words. Even when you think about friendships, when you think about us gathering, coming together, meeting somebody, be it in the workplace, or just how you cultivate friendship, it's very much based on the words we use and how we make people feel in our presence. And for us as online business owners, that presence is our website. That presence is perhaps our social media presence. How are we making the people who we want to work with feel in our spaces? And if you have the ability to make those who are on the margins feel a sense of welcome, feel a sense of value, then you're doing something right. And it's not something that just comes automatically, like, oh, I'm a good person, they'll just sense it. You have to be intentional. Inclusion, as you came to learn, is intentional. And one of the things I want to mention is, just addressing what you were talking about, fear, fear of getting it wrong. And I think the world has really done us a disservice in the examples that we have been shown when people make mistakes. When people make mistakes, they're called out publicly, they're ridiculed, there's so much vitriol, they're made to feel so much shame that you cannot take accountability. And I feel like that's probably the biggest barrier when it comes to getting people to do this work of racial equity, because they're like, I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to be used as an example. I don't want to cause more harm. I'm just going to be silent, or I'm just going to keep away. I'm not causing, I just don't want to be part of this. It's too complex. And that in itself continues to perpetuate the system. It continues to help the system grow and be what it is and evolve into what it is in with every evolution of the times that we're living in. When people are silent and they do nothing because they think by being silent, it's safer. It's safer for them. So I think the world has really done us a disservice in showing us the examples of when people make mistakes, how they're treated, and it keeps people away from doing this work.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, Annie, the mindset shift that I needed with language around this space to step around and over that fear was you so beautifully put it that you often use the language about call me in, don't call me out.
Mm.
And for me, just being able to look at that and flip that in my mind of rather than looking at, okay, if I make a mistake, I'm going to be called out, being able to change the language and say, okay, if I make a mistake, then someone will call me in. And that's probably been one of the biggest things to really help release that fear was like, yeah, I could get it wrong, but someone can lovingly then call me in to support me in my growth and help educate me here rather than fearing that someone's going to call me out. And as you said, like there are so many examples of where this gets done wrong, but there's also been so many examples of late and not just related to race where people have done it right. And, one of the most recent examples that comes to mind was and her name escapes me, unfortunately, the young Australian woman who has a disability that called out Lizzo for using the lyric spaz in her song
Yeah.
and how that then got responded to on a public, but the change that it had and again, it wasn't calling Lizzo out. This person called Lizzo in and I think if we can when we've got that fear and I understand where that fear comes because I had it and I still have it. No, I
Mm.
don't want to get it wrong. I
Mm.
don't. No one does. But yeah, being able to carry that language of, okay, well, I might, but stop using it and telling yourself that you're going to get called out and rather look at it like, well, if I do, then hopefully someone will call me in.
Mm, mm. And I think when we're given permission to make mistakes, we're not saying yes, be a repeat offender, for lack of a better terminology. Make mistakes, learn from them, move on, do better. If there was that kind of atmosphere, we would do so much better. We would make so much more progress. But there's a lot of fear for all of us, even for me as an educator. I'm like, somebody comes in with a different perspective. They're like, oh, that's wrong. That's not the right way, or this is the right way. There isn't that grace of saying, hey, have you considered this perspective? Or when you say that, this is what it means, and this is what it makes people feel. And when we call people in, it gives them the opportunity to stop and think and even take accountability. But when you call somebody out, they're so shamed that they want to either protect themselves and say, no, what you're saying is wrong and be in defense mode rather than being open to reflection and going like, yeah, actually, I hear what you're saying, or I'm going to sit with this and see how that feels with me. It's the whole shame versus accountability.
Mm.
Um, and as I'm reflecting on that, Sarah, I'm just thinking about one of the activities that we get to do as we're learning this work is exercising our racial stamina, our muscle to have these conversations. And one of the ways we do that is not just learning and keeping this learning to ourselves. But I know you did this so much, you even use the example of your husband in the opening. But you have conversations with your family. You're using your dinner table to have conversations. And very recently, even with the DM that you sent me a few days ago, around a conversation with your son. You're still unpacking things with your kids, and trying to shape their beliefs and their perspectives. Uh, Talk to me about the power of um, parenting and the result of doing this work and what that has had on your parenting.
Yeah. And before I jump into that, because that is such a big part of what's been my journey with Represented, is that I want to say to anybody listening that feels overwhelmed or that feels that they don't have a large enough platform or enough influence or enough power to actually make change, and therefore they don't. I am constantly reminded by those immediately around me how much we can influence, even if it's one person in our lives to have these conversations with. So take away the overwhelm and start with those that are in your immediate sphere. And for me, the learning keeps coming from the parenting side of things. Even throughout the course, I know I had so many examples of real life things that were happening in real time with my children. And as you just mentioned, I recently had I don't even want to say the unfortunate experience, because there was an opportunity to educate myself and my son and to be brave and to flex my muscle when it comes to the racial stamina here, that my son, who is 7 years old, um, at football training a couple of weeks ago, had the experience of having something, a racial comment from another 7-year-old said towards him. And I want to be really clear, my son is white. And for him, he didn't actually understand the comment that was said to him to be racist. However, based on what was said, he understood that the intention with the words was to tell my son that he did not belong. And the comment that was said towards my son had to do with his skin. And so we're at the end of the Australian summer here. And my son, like so many children, spends a lot of time outdoors, and he has quite a golden tan at the moment. And so this other child had said to him that he had black skin and that he couldn't be part of the group because the other children, and he listed specific names, were white. And so my son didn't understand that part, but had what he heard was I don't belong. And it actually ended up, unfortunately, becoming a bit of a physical situation. The opportunity that this presented, though, that well, I had two choices there, Annie. When we got home, I either had the choice to not address the racist comment that was said, and I could have quite easily. I could have ignored that part and spoken to my son around the interaction. However, doing this work and being still in this work after Represented, I took the opportunity to speak to my son, and I explained to him what the comment actually meant that this other child had said. And I'm so glad that I did, because what it opened up was a conversation between me and my 7-year-old in a space that I could provide him safe space to ask questions and to learn, and for him to know how to then navigate the world, or inevitably when things like this come up again, whether it's at school or in other settings. And I'm so glad I did, because my son actually said to me, when I said to him that it was a racist comment, my son stopped me and told me that he said, "No, Mum, you can't say racist. That's a naughty word." And oh, the moment that had, because I immediately said to him, "No, no, racist is not a naughty word. Saying something racist, though, that that is a whole different thing that we need to talk about." But my son, and that had not come from me or my household, that had come from, whether it's school or another setting. My son had already been told, hush, hush, racist. We don't use that word because it's uncomfortable. It's bad things. And so this exchange that happened between my son and this other child allowed me to be able to stop that at 7 of him thinking that we can't have these conversations even around race or use that word. He had already been told from society or in some other way, no, 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 don't go there. Don't use that word. And so I look at it now as we actually managed to have a really beautiful and open conversation, and we talked about skin color, and we talked about the why and the impact that for him as a white child who does have other children in his class that he's friends with that are Black, that are people of color, we actually got to talk about what their experience is like in the world. And do I think I would have had that in-depth level of a conversation and that open and that vulnerable level of conversation with my 7-year-old prior to doing the work? I know as people can say you can't really say because you don't know, but no, I probably wouldn't have, because I would have been in that place of fear and discomfort and not wanting to get it wrong or to tell my son something wrong that he then goes and says something and it's not what I've said. And I'm so thankful that I'm able to already shift and change my children's experience with racism at an age that it took me to get 34 to have these conversations, 34, and I'm having them with my 7-year-old. And I'm thankful for that.
And and that in itself, Sarah, is such a significant thing because people look at, I'm just one person. What can I possibly do? And you have just illustrated so beautifully what one person can do when they have the understanding. Because as you keep having these conversations that will come up in different ways and in different forms, you're creating a child who is so consciously aware of race and equipping them, together with his sister, to have the language, to have these conversations, because it's when we keep things quiet. And right now, I know, like in the US, there are certain words that cannot be used. I think racist is one of them. There's a whole list of words that certain government agencies cannot use anymore. And so, we're living in times or we're witnessing things uh, evolve that could continue to perpetuate systems of exclusion, systems of oppression by saying you can't do that, you can't talk about that. Because when we cannot, then we are indeed perpetuating that system. We're keeping that system in place to continue to grow and do what it needs to do to keep people separate and ultimately white supremacy. Um, You've been on a journey here, and one of the words you've used as we've spoken has been lifelong. This is a lifelong journey. So from the Sarah who began this journey many, many, many months ago, where you were like afraid, you knew you needed to do something, hearing firsthand experiences from people of color and that activating something in you, becoming a life coach. Where would you say you are right now on this journey?
Mm, yeah. And there's beauty in it being lifelong. I know that might intimidate people or feel like, well, what's the point if I'm never going to be at a place like or a finish line? But like there's so many things in life that's not the case. There is no finish line here
Mhm.
because we are trying to change a system that has been here for a very long time, and it's probably not going to change in my lifetime,
Mm.
but we need to continue to keep making progress towards it. And where I am now in my journey is that I am, gosh, how would I capsulate this? And I feel like I've had this almost rebirth when it comes to racism and the work of anti-racism, and knowing now what the two differences in those are. I am at a place where I am continuing to understand what I can do and the ways in which I can contribute. And I am also in this beautiful place of being aware and in action. And the reason that I share that is because awareness in this space is not enough. It's not enough. It's got to be in the way that we show up and we do things and the voices that we listen to and the awareness. For example, another something that else that recently happened for me, that this new level of awareness and action also came to play, was that a local magazine put out a call for International Women's Day, wanting local women to be part of a photo shoot. My first thought, Annie, I wonder if there's going to be representation in the way of race. And I don't mean just that one token Black woman.
Yeah.
That was my first thought when I saw this call for women. And once again, that's just showing the significance and how much my awareness has changed. And I didn't apply to be part of it or anything, but when I was considering it, the first thing I said to myself was, well, Sarah, if you're going to be part of this, you have to ask the question. You have to ask the question, is there going to be representation of race with this group of women? Because then I had a decision to make. How committed am I to this work if I'm not going to ask these uncomfortable questions? And would me being part of a photo shoot with 20 white women be in alignment with the action and the world that I want to contribute to when it comes to racial equity? And just even having that level of awareness or courage to consider asking these questions in these spaces, it's fuel for me to keep going with this work. It's fuel to keep going with recognizing the power as a white woman that I do have in this space to influence, because I think it's really, just because we're doing the work, we can't expect that other people out there are or have this awareness. And once again, like I spoke to, like with looking at those in your immediate sphere that you have the ability to have these conversations, that if I had applied to be part of this photo shoot and if I had asked that question, what impact would that have then had on the other people's experience and their awareness? And would it be an aha moment for them to go, oh, hold on a second. We don't, and why don't we? And what can we do? And recognizing that asking questions of people, of others, or offering alternative perspectives or challenging people at your dinner table in a healthy way is contributing to the change. And that's also been why I'm really excited. I'm hoping next month that I'm going to be able to launch my scholarship program, something that I began working on once again during Represented, and it's taking a while to get there. And it's not taking a while to get there for any other reason than me wanting to once again ensure that I'm doing something not just so it looks good, but so that it can have impact and it can contribute to change in those ways as well. And so where I'm at now, I'm aware, I am beautifully aware, I am courageously aware, but I'm also in action.
Yes. Yes. Yes, you are in action. And the byproduct of doing the work of continually educating yourself, and as you said, that we never get to a point where it ends. We're always growing. We're always students of this work. Even I myself, as somebody who educates in this space, I'm a student most of the time. I'm learning stuff. I'm going like, what? This happened, this, expanding my knowledge. And so as you continue to do this work, Sarah, you are becoming this person who is inclusive. You are becoming, it becomes it, it's who you end up becoming. It's not something that you aspire to. It just becomes part of who you are as a human. The same way you would say, integrity is one of my values. Inclusion is one of my values. When somebody says that Sarah, she is a loyal friend, it's the same thing. You are an inclusive human. It becomes part of who you are, how you're showing up in your business, how you're showing up in your life. And really, it begins with your life first, because out of your life, then you're able to influence your business. You're able to feed into your business. So it becomes an identity, really.
Yeah. I love that. And I also love that you said there that it's not about aspiring,
Mhm.
it's about this becoming, and also knowing that as you start on this journey with becoming anti-racist, that what you are doing with what you know in any given moment, it is enough until you learn something more, and then you challenge and you grow yourself again. And then that is enough where you're at. So I think for especially any white woman that might be listening to this, or a white male, just any white person, know that once you learn and you do, you're doing enough in that moment, and then you'll learn some more, you'll grow, you'll keep doing, and you'll keep evolving. And that's the work. That's the lifelong commitment.
Yeah.
That's what that's what I'm doing, is that right now with all that I know, this is the action I'm taking, and I know more will come, and then I'll do more. And being okay with that you are enough as you are with what you've got, but put yourself in spaces where you're going to continue to grow, and you're going to continue to evolve in this space. So then you don't just realize, oh, I've reverted back to silence.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it also gives you what you need to support the next generation. It gives
Yes.
you what you need to support your kids, so that when your kids show up and something's happened, you're not going like, I'm just going to sweep that one under the rug, because I honestly do not have an answer for that. And it's not like you will always have the answers, but you just have the courage to support. And you don't need to be 10 steps ahead. You just need to be a few steps ahead to be able to have that conversation. Or sometimes you can be like, you know what? That's what's happened is not right. Mommy just needs to go away and do a little bit of reading or research. I'll come back to you, and we'll talk about this together. We'll figure it out together, because what has happened is wrong. I'm not sure how we can deal with it right now, but let mommy just have a think about this, and then we'll come back together. Things like that, where you're not just ignoring it. It really just equips you and helps you be that person who's contributing to, just breaking that wall, dismantling that system piece by piece, because that's a more sustainable way to do it. Sarah, as we come to an end, um, there's somebody who's listened to your story, and they're kind of sitting on the fence. They're like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't feel ready yet. Or I've even had people say, I feel like I need to do a bit more work on my own first before I jump in, so that when I come in to doing this work with you, Annie, I'm not so ignorant. Like I just have some knowledge. What would you say to the person who's listening, saying this is potentially not the time?
Mm. Yeah, my question then to someone that's thinking this isn't the time, or I'm not ready yet, would be, well, when are you going to be? And if you are waiting to feel comfortable, if you are waiting to feel comfortable to step into this space to do the work, then you are going to be waiting forever. And we've talked about it a couple of times today. Have the courage, have the courage to learn and to unlearn and to meet yourself where you are, because wherever you are right now on this journey is perfectly okay. The fact that you are considering stepping into the room with represented, and stepping into a space with other white people that are there to learn, and potentially other people of color that are there to unlearn and learn themselves as well. Know that you're stepping into a brave space to begin this journey. And so my advice, and we all know as coaches, we don't like to give out advice, but my advice is get uncomfortable, get the courage to dive in. There is nothing more you can do outside of represented to get ready for it. You just need to get in the room. Like, that is where you're going to learn. Like, you think that you might need to go and do more in the room, in represented, in a space where you can ask the uncomfortable questions, where you can be called in and not called out. That is the room where you learn. That is the space where you grow. And so stop looking for it outside and go all in.
Go all in. Sarah, my final question, and I ask this question to every guest who has been on this podcast. And that question is, if fear wasn't a factor, if we removed fear, how do you think you'd show up in your work, or even potentially in this work of racial equity?
Oh, what a good question, hey? If fear for me didn't exist around this space, as a white woman with all the privilege that I have, that not just from the color of my skin, but all the other, being fully able-bodied and cisgendered and all of those things, I would use my voice more than what I do now. I'm having these conversations in what I would say are my safe spaces, my home, my dinner table with my children, with my husband. If fear didn't exist, and it's not to say I'm never going to get there, but if fear didn't exist right now, I'd be using my voice more after being silent for so long. And that's been my message to my son after all of these conversations. I literally use the words to him: don't be afraid to use your voice. If you see something, call it out. If you hear something, call it out. And saying that, Annie, I probably need to hear those words back to myself time and time again, is don't be afraid of getting it wrong. Don't be afraid of upsetting someone. Use your voice. And that's what I need to hear, is continue to use my voice.
That is a beautiful place to end this conversation. Don't be afraid to use your voice. And I think those are words that will remain with your son and even your daughter as they grow up. Don't be afraid to use your voice. And so where can people connect with you if they want to learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm over on Instagram with Sarah Townsend, and also my website with sarah-townsend.com.
Beautiful. Sarah, thank you so much for having this necessary conversation. Thank you for trusting me and for everything that you've shared. It means a lot. And I know it will go so far in helping those people who need to hear this message. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to share.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented.